How should we seek? Just a reminder, in your bulletin there are an outline for you to follow along through the notes. There's also a link if you prefer to read through the sermon manuscript as we're going through the service on your phones. That's available for you. How should we seek reconciliation with those that we've hurt or who have hurt us? How should we seek reconciliation with others? When you look at the scripture, one of the things we see immediately after the fall of Adam and Eve, in Genesis chapter 3, verse 16, God prophesies to Adam and Eve that the result of their sin would be fractured relationships. The woman would desire to control the husband, and the husband would forcibly dominate the wife. There would be discord in the marriage relationship. And from this broken marriage relationship, there would be discord in the children of the marriage. You know the story very well. In Genesis chapter 4, Cain, the oldest son of Adam and Eve, murders his brother Abel. Broken marriages create fractured children often. And we see that in this text. When we get to the story of Jacob, Jacob also has a dysfunctional home. The wife Rebekah loves Jacob. The husband Isaac loves Esau. Esau, as the oldest, was to receive the birthright. But Jacob and the mom hatch a plan for Jacob to receive the birthright. Jacob dresses as Esau. He deceives Isaac. When he receives the blessing from the father, Esau becomes murderously angry at Jacob. And like Cain, Esau wants to murder Jacob. You know the story we've been going through for the last couple of weeks. But Jacob flees to Haran to find himself a wife and to flee his brother Esau. While in Haran, he works for Laban for two wives, for one wife, and is tricked into having two wives. He works for him, but in that time, he has a difficult, dysfunctional relationship with his uncle, his father-in-law and his uncle, which is kind of weird to say, right? Father-in-law and uncle, right? So he has a dysfunctional relationship with Laban. Laban tricks him into marrying the second daughter. When he starts working for him for 6 years, Laban changes the wages 10 times. Eventually, because of this dysfunctional relationship, Jacob flees Laban in the middle of the night. And he gets ahead for 7 days. Laban comes after him in 7 days, and they have this time of fleshing out their problems. Laban is probably going to hurt Jacob, but God shows up to Laban right before he meets with him in a dream and tells him, don't say one good word to him and don't say one bad word to him. Basically, do nothing harmful or good. Probably what was happening in that context, Laban was going to try to bless him to bring him back, give him a promise of blessing, or threaten to hurt him or his family if he didn't return. He says, say nothing, good or bad, to him. So they come to a resolution, somewhat of a peace contract where they won't hurt each other. All of a sudden, what we see next is that, as we're going to look at in this text, God appears, or rather has angels appear to Jacob, and Jacob goes and tries to seek reconciliation with his brother, this relationship that has been broken for 20 years. As he's leaving Haran and on his way to Canaan, he sends messengers off to try to restore this relationship that's broken. Because we live in a sinful world, and because we have sin in our hearts, we are going to commonly hurt others. You're going to say words that you wish you didn't say. You're going to speak words that you can't take back, that people are going to hold on to. We're going to have broken relationships because we have sin in ourselves and we live with people, around people that have sin. Sadly, many times we hurt the people that are closest to us. It's not your coworker many times. It's your husband or your friend or your father or your sister. We commonly have discord in our relationships. And because of that, we will commonly need to seek reconciliation just like Jacob does. Christ spoke a lot about reconciliation in his teachings. Right after the Lord's Prayer in Matthew chapter 6:14, he says that we must forgive others or God will not forgive us. The reality is that our broken relationships with one another affect our relationship with God the Father. In Matthew chapter 18, he gives the parable of the merciless servant. The master forgave a servant this great debt, and this servant doesn't forgive a fellow servant a lesser debt. And so the master throws this man into prison to be tortured. And Jesus says to the disciples, so will my Father do to you if you do not forgive from the heart. Not only does God not forgive us, but he disciplines us when we are unforgiving towards others, when we have hurt others and haven't sought reconciliation. Our relationships with others affect our relationship with God. Peter says this in 1 Peter 3:7. He says, husbands, be considerate of your wives as the weaker or more delicate vessel, meaning you're going to be more prone to hurt her. I commonly use the illustration, if you take a brick and a china vase and they're going to dance with one another, then which one's typically going to get hurt? The vase. Husbands, be considerate of your wives as the more delicate vessel, lest your prayers be hindered. That when husbands are hurting their wives and not being considerate of their wives, then it affects their relationship with God. Because our relationships affect our relationship with God, and also Scripture says it gives the devil a foothold in our lives, Ephesians 4:26 and 27, we must often seek reconciliation. Many of us, even as we're talking about this topic, people are coming to our minds. Man, I blew that. Man, I got to go fix that, right? People are coming to our minds. How should we seek reconciliation in our relationships where we've hurt others or where they have hurt us? I think we learn principles about that as we see Jacob go and try to fix a relationship, sadly, that has been broken for 20 years. Now, I want you to think about this as well. Not only has this relationship, he has to leave his father and mother and go serve Laban for 20 years, but this broken relationship with Esau affects his relationship with his father, affects his relationship with his mother. He hasn't seen them in 20 years. Our broken relationships not only affect our relationship with God and with that person, but they typically affect the relationships around us as well. He had a tremendous burden that he was bearing for these 20 years. And after reconciling with Laban, soon after he goes and seeks to try to reconcile with Esau. How can we seek reconciliation in our broken relationships? We're going to look at several different principles, as you see in your notes. Here's the first one. To seek reconciliation, we must continually abide in God's presence. To seek reconciliation, we must continually abide in God's presence. Where do we see this? Look at verses 1 and 2. So Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he exclaimed, "This is the camp of God." So he named that place Mahanaim. Mahanaim. Now, often when this text, he says, "This is the camp of God." Now, when you look at this, it says that the angels of God met him, right? It doesn't say that Jacob met the angels, like he's walking around and, there's a bunch of angels everywhere, right? That's probably not what happens. The angels of God met him. What does that mean? The angels initiated. They initiated. Probably what's going on here is these angels are ministering to him after this very difficult time with Jacob. We saw this in Matthew chapter 4. Matthew chapter 4, verse 11 with Christ. Remember, Christ is tempted in the wilderness for 40 days, and right after he finishes this difficult time of being tempted, it says the angels of God came and ministered to him, healing him, empowering him for his next ministry as he goes and starts this 30 years of preaching and teaching and discipling 12. The angels of God came and ministered to Christ. And in the same way, these angels come and minister, they meet with Jacob. Hebrews 1:14 tells us this about angels, that angels are spirits sent to minister to those who will inherit salvation. If you're a child of God, if you are born again, then you have angels that minister to you as well. And they probably minister to you even more strategically at certain times. Psalm 91, 11 through 12 says this, "For he will order his angels to protect you in all you do. They will lift up their hands. They will lift you up in their hands, so you will not slip and fall on a stone." And Matthew 18:10, Christ said this, "Be careful to not despise any of these little ones," these young spiritual believers. "For their angels, their angels always see the face of God." God has angels assigned, whether guardian angels or whatever, there's different arguments about that, but angels assigned to take care of his believers, and they are always looking to the face of God. Why? Listening for a command to minister or to protect or to judge. His angels are always there ministering, meeting with his children. When Jacob experiences this, he says, this is the camp of God. The word camp here can be translated host, army. These are warring angels, large group of people. He sees many angels that have come to minister to him. They did not just appear to him, but met him. This word Mahanaim means two camps. So when he sees them, he says two camps. What does he mean by two camps? Commentators are divided about this. Some people say he looks and says, wow, we're a large camp, and they're a large camp. There are two camps here. Maybe. But most times when they name a place after some meeting with God, we'll see in the next chapter where he has a wrestling match with God, he calls the place Peniel, the face of God, right? When when God provided a ram for Abraham, he calls this place Jehovah Jireh. He names it primarily after God. He provides. So other commentators believe that when he sees these angels, it's actually two camps of angels. Not my camp and their camp. Look, it's two camps. Two camps of angels. Two armies of angels. This large, vast group of angels that he meets. And many think, including myself, that probably what's happening here is that there's a camp that's on one side protecting him from Laban that he just had a discord with. And there's a camp on the other side because as you know the story goes, he's about to meet with Esau. God is protecting him in all his ways. He is surrounded by angels in this difficult situation. Two armies that are protecting him. We also see this throughout Scripture as God surrounds his believers with angels. In 2 Kings 6, 15 through 17, we see the story of Elisha. There's a Syrian army that is going to attack Elisha. They have surrounded the city, and Elisha's servant is worried. And so Elisha prays, Lord, show him who's with us. And Elisha's servant's eyes are open. He sees these fiery angels surrounding the camp, protecting him, protecting them from the enemy. We also probably get a picture of this in the story of Job. Job 1:10, Satan says to God, of course he worships you. You've put a hedge of protection around him. Probably referring to the angels surrounding Job and protecting Job. Psalm 34:7 says, the Lord's angel camps around the Lord's loyal followers and delivers them. That's probably what's happening here. The Lord's angels have camped around him on both sides. He doesn't even know what's ahead of him with this story with Esau. He's not aware of what's about to happen. But God's angels were there. And it's great to think about that when we enter those dangerous situations, difficult situations, that God is there as well, providing his angels, providing to encourage and strengthen. One of the things that we see here before he ends up reconciling with Esau, we're going to get to this in the next text at the end of chapter 32. But not only does God send angels to meet with him, representing God's presence, but what happens to Esau right before he reconciles with his brother? He wrestles with a man who is God. Twice God appears, angels that are representing him, and then God appears to him later on in the same text to wrestle with him. Why? Again, I believe God is empowering him for reconciliation. I'm protecting you. Even the fact that he reaches out to Esau after this time with these angels probably is something that's been inspired by his time in the presence of God, or the angels that are ministering the grace of God to him. In the same way, we will probably not seek reconciliation if we are not spending time in the presence of God. Many times, instead of seeking reconciliation, we will find that we're prone to hang on to our unforgiveness, hang on to the bitterness of what has happened to us. Galatians 5:20 through 21 says this. Galatians 5:20 through 21. The acts of the flesh are hostilities, strife,
jealousy, outbursts of anger, selfish rivalries, dissensions, factions, envy, murder. Left to yourself, apart from God's grace, you're going to have a lot of discord in your life. And in fact, it's going to be your desires that are prompting it. Yes, someone hurt you, but you've got evil responding in the same way. Left to yourself, apart from God's grace, that's what's inside of you. That's what's inside of me. Listen to what he says in Galatians 5:22 through 23. The fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Galatians 5:16, he tells us how we can have the fruits of the Spirit instead of the acts of hostility and strife and rivalry. He says, live in the Spirit. Make your home in the Spirit, and you will not fulfill the lust of the flesh. The desire for anger and bitterness and to return evil for evil. When you are living, when you're meeting with receiving God's grace from his angels, when you're being in the presence of God as you wrestle with him, you're going to find an ability, a desire to reconcile, a desire to forgive instead of holding on to your bitterness. This is what happens. God, for reconciliation, God provides angels, and he meets with Jacob, as we're going to see in the next text, all right before there's reconciliation. If you're not meeting with God, you're going to be a person that's holding on to your bitterness. You're going to be a person that's holding on to your unforgiveness towards others. You're going to find that as Jacob leaves and all of a sudden seek reconciliation, or goes to seek reconciliation, that you will have no desire to reconcile with anybody else unless you are living and receiving the grace of God, which he receives right before he initiates reconciliation after 20 years. Are you receiving God's grace by being in his presence? Are you allowing his angels to minister to you as you seek his face, or are you living in the flesh? Bitterness, unforgiveness. Here's the next point I think we can get from this text. To seek reconciliation, we must humble ourselves and give up our rights. To seek reconciliation, we must humble ourselves and give up our rights. In Genesis 32, 3 through 5, Jacob sends messengers to Esau, and he tells them this is what they're to say. I have been staying with Laban until now. I have oxen, donkeys, sheep, male and female servants. I have sent this message to inform my Lord so that I may find favor in your sight. Now, one of the things that you must discern as you're reading his message to Esau is that he is humbling himself before him. He calls him Lord. Now you have to remember, Isaac made Jacob the ruler over Esau. When he sends this message, he's saying, I am not taking my rights as the right of the firstborn. He submits to him as Lord, making him, I'm your servant. What does Jacob do? Well, all especially, I'm not myself humble. Best, you don't see one person humble, what many others. Jacob doesn't need to do this. He has the right? But instead he humbles himself before Esau. Philippians 2, 3 through 4 says this. Paul is speaking to a congregation that's having discord, and so he's helping to have them have reconciliation. Philippians chapter 4, 2, Euodia and Syntyche, these two women are fighting in the church, and it seems to be splitting the church. And so Paul is giving them ways to have reconciliation. He says this, instead of being motivated by Philippians 2, 3 through 4, instead of being motivated by selfish ambition or vanity, Each of you in humility should be moved to treat one another as more important than yourselves. Each of you should be concerned not only about your own interests, but also about the interest of others as well. He says, humble yourself, right? Humble yourself and seek their interests over your own. We've battled when we seek our interests over somebody else's interests. When Jacob does this here in Genesis chapter 32, it's very similar to what his grandfather, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Yeah, so his grandfather does the same thing in Genesis 13, if you remember what happens in that context. In Genesis 13, Abraham has Lot with him, and they both have become wealthy. They have herdsmen, etc., and they're grazing together. But Lot's herdsmen and Abraham's herdsmen are fighting amongst one another. And so what Abraham does, he takes Lot and says, take your pick of the land. If you go this way, I'll go this way. What Abraham does was not culturally correct. Abraham is the patriarch. He has the rights, right? He has the cultural right and he has the spiritual right. God has given the land to him. But what does he do? He humbles both his spiritual right and his cultural right and says, you go first, you take the pick. In the same way, Jacob has the spiritual right. God told him, he told him that his brother was going to submit to him even while he was in the womb, meaning he didn't hear this, but his parents must have told him, right? Esau will serve, the older will serve the younger. God had given him the right. God had met with him in Genesis chapter 28 at Bethel, right? He had received the blessing of Abraham. He has a spiritual right. He has the cultural right. His father has blessed him. But what does he do? Like Abraham, the great man of faith, when you humble yourself, when you, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the land. When you humble yourself, God blesses you. God blesses you. When you humble yourself before others, seeking reconciliation, seeking their desires over your own. Yes, do we have a right to be angry? Absolutely. Yes, do they wrong us? Absolutely. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't humble ourselves and give up our rights. In 1 Corinthians 6:7, Paul, in speaking to a congregation that's suing one another, he says this in 1 Corinthians 6:7, the fact that you have lawsuits among yourselves demonstrates that you have already been defeated. Why not rather just be wronged? Why not rather just be cheated? Why not just give up your rights? Right? Matthew 5, turn the other cheek. Why don't you just give up your rights to seek reconciliation? Someone has to be the mature one in the relationship, right? Proverbs 15:1 says, a gentle response turns away anger, but a harsh word stirs up wrath. If we are going to seek reconciliation, we must, like Jacob, speak in humility, speak gentle words towards others instead of harsh words back, right? But we also must act gently towards them in hopes of seeking reconciliation. Now, let me add this really quickly. I'm not going to try to parse this up. This doesn't mean that there aren't times when we seek justice. There may be times when that. Romans 13, 1-7, God says God has given us authorities for justice. There may be times where you seek justice. And it doesn't mean that there aren't times where you peaceably separate. Laban, they took a step and they worked things out so they could peaceably separate. Right? And so it may look in different ways, but we should be humble in whatever way that we respond. Here's the next point. To seek reconciliation, we must realize that it might not happen immediately. To seek reconciliation, we must realize it might not happen immediately. In verses 6-8, the messengers returned to Jacob and said, we went to your brother Esau. He is coming to meet you and has 400 men with him. Jacob was very afraid and upset. So he divided the people who were with him into two camps, as well as the flocks and herds and camels. If Esau attacks one camp, he thought, then the other camp will be able to escape. One of the things that when Esau responds by bringing 400 men, Jacob takes this as a threat. Now let me add this in here. We don't know for sure that Esau's desire is to hurt Jacob. But it seems that Jacob is right in seeing this as a threat for many reasons. One, when Jacob's mother, Rebekah, had sent him to Haran to live with Laban, she said, after your brother's anger has subsided, I will send word to you. I'll send word to you, and then you come back. It's been 20 years. Obviously, he has not received any word yet. So he has not received word from the mom that Esau has forgiven him. Also, the fact that they have tension in their relationship, and he brings this large army to go and meet him, seems like it's a rational, that he's come to a rational conclusion. Esau is still angry. Let me say this. You've often heard the phrase, time heals all wounds. Let me tell you, that's heresy. Time does not heal all wounds. For many people, when time goes between some accident or someone's hurt you, many times if there's never reconciliation or forgiveness, guess what happens? The wounds cement. The wounds cement, and it's kind of like, sometimes in the midst of counseling, I'll be talking to someone and something happened 3-4 years ago, but when they're talking about it, it's like it happened yesterday. Fresh, painful, the scars are there. When there is no reconciliation and forgiveness, what happens is many people, they're crippled through life. They limp for the rest of their lives. They won't forgive anyone. They can't trust anyone. They don't let people get in their space. Again, that hurt from family or someone who hurt them affects all their other relationships, just like Jacob's failure with Esau affected his relationship with his mom and father. All of a sudden, they're just kind of wounded people. Time does not heal all wounds. In fact, many times it just cements them and makes them worse. When they see that person, everything comes back. When they hear about their prosperity or they watch a movie and see something that's similar to what they experienced, it's like it all comes back like flashbacks. And the wounds and the pain, we know this. We experience this not just with long pains. For myself, a lot of times, I'm at home arguing in my mind with someone who is not there. Just recounting what happened and what was said and what I would have said if I had done it over again. Right? Just read, and it just stays alive. And many times when we seek reconciliation, it may not happen immediately. Time does not heal all wounds. However, God can. God can heal wounds. When we forgive others, when we seek reconciliation, then there can be healing. Otherwise, the wounds tend to cement. Lots of people walking around with limps. Romans 12:11 says this, if possible, so far as depends on you, live peaceable with all men. Meaning that I can't control someone's response, but I can do my part. I can reach out and take a step. And many times they may not initially, if you don't understand that they may not initially respond, then what may happen is you may get discouraged, or you may just simply quit. Reaching out many times is simply the first step in having reconciliation. God may still need to do a work in their lives, in their hearts, after it's been initiated, and maybe even a work on your side. Reaching out is just the first step. There may be other steps that help build trust so that there can be reconciliation. Some people are like, well, I asked for forgiveness, and they didn't forgive me. And I'm like, come on, don't you understand how people are? Do you understand how your heart is? Right? Sometimes God still needs to do a work in their heart. And we need to be patient. We need to seek reconciliation. And also there's a time of waiting and maybe taking further humble steps to build trust. We can't change people's hearts, but we can do our part and trust God with the rest. Here's the next point. To seek reconciliation, we must labor in prayer. To seek reconciliation, we must labor in prayer. So Jacob hears and he's prudent. He divides into camps and says if he attacks one, then maybe one can get away. But then it says he goes and prays. Verses 9 through 12. Then Jacob prayed, O God, my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, O Lord, you said to me, return to your land and to your relatives, and I'll make you prosper. I'm not worthy of all the faithful love you have shown your servant. With only my walking stick I crossed the Jordan, but now I have become two camps. Rescue me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, as well as the mothers with their children. But you said, I will certainly make you prosper, and I will make your descendants like the sand of the seashore and too numerous to count. Now, one of the things that's interesting is we've been going through the story of Jacob. Guess what this is? This is the first time we see recorded in the Bible that Jacob prays. His first recorded prayer. In Genesis 28, you remember God meets with him at Bethel, where he has this ladder with angels coming down. But we never see Jacob pray in response. He does name the place Bethel. He makes a vow. There's obedience, but we never see it said that he prayed. When Jacob has a dream in Genesis 31, and God tells him to go, we see him act obediently, calls his wives and leaves, but it never says that he prayed. In Genesis 32, when he sees the two angels, the two camps of angels, the two armies, again, he names the place Mahanaim, but it doesn't say that he prays. Maybe this is one of Jacob's major weaknesses. He's a man of action, yes, but it seems that he was not a man of prayer. Right? When he first gets to Haran to find a wife, if you remember the story, similar with Abraham's servant goes to Haran to find a wife. He gets to the well and he prays and God shows him. He gets there and he sees a beautiful woman and he must say to himself, this must be her. It seems that Leah is the one. Leah is the one that has the child of promise. He never prays then as well. This man, the reason he's so fickle in his relationship with God is because he was so weak in his prayer life. Many of us are fickle in our relationship with God because we're also weak in our prayer lives. Remember what Christ said to his disciples before he went to the cross? You're going to deny me? He takes them to a mountain and it tells them, he says, pray lest you enter temptation. God provides a way of escape, but they all fall asleep. The leaders fall asleep and they all deny him. Maybe no doubt, the reason that many times we fall into discord with others, we fall into sin, is because we're often so weak in our prayer lives as well. We don't pray, we sleep longer instead, right? Is that just me, or am I the only one confessing my sin? Sleep a little bit too long and I don't pray like I should, right? Man, forget you guys. I feel like I'm by myself. I'm not the only one sleeping in. We sleep a little too long, we don't pray, and then what happens? We enter into temptation and we fall. That seems to be one of his problems. He had a weak prayer life leading to bad decisions and deceitful practices. However, through this situation, God puts him in a perfect situation. He can't go backwards because he's got Laban who was just out there trying to get him. And now he's got Esau in the front. Then he prays. Many times God will put us between a rock and a hard place, two difficult situations, so that we can be trained in prayer as well. So all of a sudden we can develop dependence upon God instead of dependence upon our wisdom and our strength. God is training this, developing him into a person of prayer. Abraham was a person of prayer. Isaac was a person of prayer. He prays and his wife has a child, right? Jacob doesn't seem to have picked that up. Jacob was very afraid, but this fear, instead of leading him into hopelessness, led him to hope as he prayed. Now, as we look at this prayer, there are 5 aspects. It's a really good prayer. There are 5 aspects of this prayer. All of them should be demonstrated in our prayer life. What are these 5 aspects of prayer that we see in there? Here's the first part. In prayer, we must pray God's word. In prayer, we must pray God's word. Verse 9. He talked about how God said to him, return to your land and to your relatives, and I'll prosper you. Verse 12, he reiterates God's promise to make his children like sands on the seashore. One of the things that you should do in prayer is pray God's promises, pray God's scripture. When Christ is on the cross, when he's dying, he says, Lord, into your hands I commit my spirit. Psalm 31. My God, why have you forsaken me? Psalm 22. He is praying scripture in his difficult time. The Word of God inspires prayer and it empowers prayer. If you are weak in the Word of God, guess what? You're probably not going to be a strong prayer. Because the Word of God, when God speaks to us, you naturally want to respond. Jacob prays Scripture. He prays the promises, and we should do that as well. Many promises. He'll never leave us nor forsake us. He'll provide our needs as we seek first His kingdom. He gives us peace as we reject anxiety and live in thanksgiving and prayer. He gives us wisdom if we ask for it, but we must pray. Second aspect of this prayer. In prayer, we must humble ourselves before the Lord. And depending on his grace. We must humble ourselves before the Lord depending on his grace. Verse 10, I am not worthy of all the faithful love you have shown your servant. I'm not worthy. You remember in Luke chapter 18, 9 through 14, there's the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. The Pharisee comes before God and says, God, I thank you that I give 10th of all I have. Thank you, God, I'm not like this tax collector over here. The tax collector says, Lord, woe is me, I'm a sinner. And Christ says, the tax collector went home justified. Many of us come to God not in humility and brokenness, but in pride. Sometimes we're angry at God. God opposes the proud, James 4:6, meaning instead of blessing, you get slapped around and get fought against. He gets in war gear against the proud who brings their pride and I deserve this and I deserve that. But he gives grace to the humble. The Pharisee didn't get blessing, but the tax collector did. A lot of Christians aren't very humble in their prayer life. They come like God owes them something. And not the fact that you don't deserve anything, but wrath. It's grace. I'm not worthy of anything. It's your grace, Lord. Many times we miss God's best because we're prideful in our prayer lives like the Pharisee. Third, in prayer, we must declare God's faithfulness. In prayer, we must declare God's faithfulness. In verse 10, with only my walking stick, I crossed the Jordan. But now I have become two camps. I'm like two armies, God. When I first went to Haran, my father sent me without nothing, without anything. Even though I was wealthy, all I had was a walking stick. And now, God, without my father's wealth, without Laban giving me anything, I worked for it, you have made me like two armies. One of the things you'll see when you're reading the Psalms, many times the Psalms are simply people declaring God's faithfulness. Lord, you delivered us from Egypt. Lord, you split the Red Sea. Lord, you conquered our enemies, right? Many times we go before God and we never say thank you. We never talk about how he blessed us and how you delivered us and how you provided. We never declare how faithful he is. Psalm 107:2 says this, Psalm 107:2, let those delivered by the Lord speak out. Those whom he has delivered from the power of the enemy. In one sentence, Jacob describes 20 years. I had a walking stick. And now I have two camps. You gave me 12 children and 2 wives. And you gave me tons of servants. We're going to see him send 550 animals as a gift. God has prospered him. In one sentence, he encapsulates God's faithfulness. How often do you go before God and say thank you? Do you remember how he provided? You prayed for the test, but after he helped you, did you say thank you? Did you remember how, when all of a sudden you're in a bad time, do you sit there and remember how he delivered you at one other time in your life? Do you bring his faithfulness before him? That's what we see modeled in prayer in Scripture. We should do that often. Giving thanks and remembering his blessings, counting his faithfulness. Here's the fourth aspect of this prayer. In prayer, we must bring our petitions before the Lord. Bring our petitions. Verse 11, rescue me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau. Deliver me, God. The Lord's Prayer is 6 petitions. Like, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Give us our daily bread, forgive us our trespasses, deliver us from the evil one. Bring your petitions. James 4:2 says, you have not because you ask not. Now I kind of hate this illustration. It was in a book called Prayer of Jabez, but I think it's so true. It's not true, but it's so true. In the story in the Prayer of Jabez, this man is in heaven and he's got Peter as a guide. Let me show you around heaven, Peter says. So Peter takes him over here and Peter takes him over here. And he says, well, what about this room over here? He says, oh, did I show you this over here? What about this room? Oh, did I show you this over here? What about this room? And so Peter takes this man into the room and he says, these are all the good things that you would have had if you would have simply asked. God loves to give his children good gifts. He wants to give you righteousness. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. You didn't really desire for people to be saved, so I really couldn't use you in that. You weren't constantly bringing evangelism before me. You really didn't pray to know the Word of God more, and I couldn't really open up the Scripture. I couldn't really use you to bless children because you really didn't just ask, but I wanted to. I wanted to give you so much. James says, you have not because you ask not. He brings his petition before the Lord. And we should bring our petitions before the Lord as well. He cries out for deliverance. Fifth, in prayer, we must honestly share our thoughts and emotions with God. We must honestly share our thoughts and emotions with God. In verse 12, for I am afraid. I'm afraid he will come and attack me. I'm also worried about my mothers and their children. Lord, I'm afraid. Many of the Psalms are just like this. There are people honestly sharing their emotions, their thoughts, their fears, their worries before the Lord. Many times we have a problem sharing with people because we're afraid what they will do with our secrets. They'll look down upon us. They might share it with others. And so we don't honestly share with people many times. But the reality is, God already knows. He already knows your fears. He already knows your worries. He already knows your concerns. And He's trustworthy. He's not going to publicize them all over the world for everybody to know. And so because He's trustworthy and He already knows, and the people that we share with are typically the people that know us best. He already knows. He knows the number of hairs on your head. He remembers your fears better than you do. Psalm says He puts every one of your tears in a bottle. They're memorialized. Ask any parent in here. When I got a 5-year-old daughter. When I hear her cry, I'm like, no, that's not my kid. I know her cry. That's not. You kind of on edge. You hear cries. I'm like, oh. He puts every tear in a bottle. He knows that cry. He knows your worries. 1 Peter 5:7, I believe it is. 1 Peter 5:7 says, cast your cares before the Lord, for He cares for you. Cast your anxieties before Him, for He cares for you. He knows them. He's concerned with them. And here's the other thing. He's someone who can do something about it. Jacob prays a tremendous prayer. Prayer is if we're going to seek reconciliation, if we're praying for reconciliation between the north and south, we're going to have to labor in prayer. If you're going to pray for reconciliation in a church or in Handong community, you're going to have to labor in prayer. There are going to be some relationships, a friend that may be about to get a divorce or someone that's hurting, that if you're not willing to labor in prayer, you may not see the blessings that you desire. We're going to have to labor in prayer. Jacob prays. He prays with God, and I think as we look at the next text, when he wrestles with God, I think there's a prayer as he's praying for a blessing. I think that blessing also has to do with his situation with Esau. He labors in prayer. God's work is reconciliation. He's the reconciler. He sent Christ to die for the sins of the world. One, to reconcile you with God, but also to reconcile relationships. He cares about your relationships. There's something you should pray for. He cares about the reconciliation of brothers and sisters and nations throughout the world. He cares. He died because He cared so much. You can bring them before you. He wants you to bring it before Him. Here's the final point. To seek reconciliation, we must bless those separated from us. We must bless those separated from us. Next, we see Jacob seek to pacify Esau. He sends 550 animals plus, because with one of them, I think he says with the camels or something like that, it says, and their young. And so it seems like if you count them out, there's 550 30 female camels with their young. So 550 animals plus. We don't know how many. Maybe 580, maybe 600. But he sends a great amount of animals towards Jacob. Now let me add this in here. Commentators are divided on this. They say Jacob prayed, but now he's not trusting God. Look, now he's back to his own devices. He should just trust God. I don't think that's what's happening here. I think Jacob has been inspired by his time in prayer, and God has given him wisdom. This is an ingenious plan. What he would do is he'd send them out in three different caravans, and each one pass with gift, and they would say, this is from your servant Jacob. And then there would be a space, and this is from your servant Jacob, meant to honor you. And so the space and all of the words are all meant to pacify and help Jacob. Now, again, why do I think this is an act of faith and wisdom that God has given him? This is what Matthew Henry said. Matthew Henry, a famous commentary, wrote a commentary over the whole Bible. He says this: when we have prayed to God for any mercy, we must second our prayers with our endeavors. Else, instead of trusting God, we tempt God. Let me tell you something. If you're praying for a job and you don't put out any resumes, guess what? You probably ain't going to get no job, right? If you pray and ask and you don't follow up and do an act of faith, in the same way, when we're seeking reconciliation, if you just pray and you don't go and reach out and show acts of kindness towards someone, then there may not ever be reconciliation. It seems that this is inspired by God, and I think there's wisdom that comes from it. This is an act of faith. If he did nothing, then it would probably show a lack of faith. A lack of faith. Romans 12, 19 through 21 says this. Romans 12, 19 through 21. Do not avenge yourselves, dear friends, but give place to God's wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Rather, listen to this, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him drink. Stop complaining about them and go serve them, right? For in doing this, you will be heaping burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil like we typically are, but overcome evil with good. What does Paul say? Show acts of kindness to those you have hurt or have hurt you. And by doing that, you overcome the evil with good. That's exactly what Jacob is doing here. He's showing acts of kindness and love towards his relative. In Genesis 33, as you know, eventually they embrace and they hug. Maybe God used these acts of kindness as fiery coals on his head. Man, God has changed Jacob. He's not the same person that deceived me. He's humbled himself. His words have been kind to me. His acts have been kind to me. And what happens is, as he's receiving this, he's being transformed, overcome by good. In the same way, we should do that to others. We should pray for them. We should reach out to them. We should bless them. When they curse us, we should respond with blessing instead or say nothing. Through Jacob's trust in God, his humility, his prayer, his acts of kindness, God eventually changes the heart of Esau. I want to invite EPT up here. How can we seek reconciliation with others? One, we must continually abide in God's presence. 2 camps of angels come and meet with him, probably showing the protection, but also a ministry to Jacob. Later we're going to see that before he reconciles God, he has a time of wrestling and prayer with God. If you're not spending time with God, you're going to find no desire to reconcile. You're just going to say, well, I didn't do this and I have rights and etc. And you'll find yourself with no desire. If we're going to seek reconciliation, we must humble ourselves and give up our rights. Though he has the right, he humbles himself before his brother. To seek reconciliation, we must realize it might not happen immediately. We reach out, we take small steps at building trust, but we humble ourselves and trust God. He's the one that changes hearts. Simply because you ask doesn't mean it happens immediately. To seek reconciliation, we must labor in prayer. And finally, to seek reconciliation, we must bless those separated from us. If we could take a second and just pray, if you could put your hands on the people that are around you right now. Would you pray that angels would meet with them? That God's presence would be around them to encourage them, to strengthen them, to help them do whatever God's called them to do, and specifically if there are any relationships in their lives that are broken, that God would empower them to reach out and minister to others, to love them and humble themselves before them. If you could pray for that. Pray that God would reconcile any relationships they have. Also pray that God would make them an agent of reconciliation. Many times we're called to get involved and help others reconcile. Philippians chapter 4, he calls for a man called yoke fellow. Dear yoke fellow, help these 2 women to agree in the Lord. Sometimes you got people around you and God wants to use you to help them reconcile. Pray like Christ that they would be agents of reconciliation, not just with people, but maybe even with nations and communities, reconcilers and companies and businesses. If you could pray for those around you right now.